All right, this is Citizenship and Immigration Attorney Parviz Malakouti. Today is August 8th, and this is our 24th Mobility Space. Today we're talking about the inability to renounce citizenship. And this space is part of our mobility spaces. We're doing 50 spaces on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, freedom of movement, sovereignty, and of course, individual mobility. So for today's space, I'd like to have a discussion about this attack vector generally, this concept, this possibility of being unable to renounce a citizenship. We'll talk about some specifics of some countries. We have, of course, Alex and John here. And I know there's interest about this, particularly in the US context, and then also particularly in the Argentine context, because Argentina just announced fairly recently that they have started a citizenship by investment program. And so that has people thinking about the possibility of Argentine citizenship. So we'll talk about some specifics. But what I'd really like to get into is how to think about this attack vector generally. You know, there's over 180, 190 countries in the world. We can't really get into the technical details of every single country's renunciation / relinquishment rules. And so I'd like to get people's opinions and talk about how to think about the issue generally, general heuristics for thinking about how one should consider the inability, either present or future, to renounce or relinquish a citizenship. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, obviously, if you have a country that has, certain laws or certain background, legislative or other legal background regarding relinquishment, one can turn to that, obviously, to try to draw conclusions about where the law is and where the law is headed, etc. But the second scenario, right, is a country that might not have much in the way of law to analyze regarding relinquishment, and therefore one might have to think about just the possibility, go more into kind of the educated guess, the speculation realm of trying to come down on an opinion of how likely it is that a particular country could make it either impossible or difficult, right? Because that's also a related attack vector, difficulty in relinquishment. Make it difficult to relinquish that citizenship during the lifespan of the person who's considering getting that citizenship, or possibly during that person's lifespan and, let's say, their children's lifespan as well, right? So if you're considering citizenship in a country that has currently no issues at all, as far as you can tell, with regards to relinquishment, but you're picking up multiple citizenships, right? Especially if you're, in this realm of, passport bros, passport collectors. If you're thinking about 3, 4, 5 citizenships, the possibility, obviously, that any one of those countries makes it difficult or impossible to relinquish in the future comparatively goes up, of course, right? Because those are more countries, more sets of laws that you're going to be subject to as a citizen. So so this is I think kind of the framework of how I want to talk about this. We got Alex here, we got David Blundell, of course, we got Chris Lord, we got HOHHLE, and I guess I'll kick off the space by throwing out a question to Alex, right? And I know Alex you've been interested in Argentine citizenship, and of course, the possibility of not being able to relinquish Argentine citizenship. Before we get into specific countries, how do you think, Alex, a person should consider the threat of possibly not being able to relinquish a citizenship in the future from a country that doesn't explicitly have a prohibition? How should somebody consider the potential threat? How should somebody look at that issue, in your opinion?
I would look at the general culture of the country from a legal perspective and see if you can find any cases relating to citizenship to try to figure out how they approach the idea of naturalization. Sometimes constitutions can be helpful for that and give clarity, or maybe they have some laws on the books or some initial precedents that are being formed. That's how I'd look at the potential. And then I'd also look at the capability of the country and their culture of extraterritorial enforcement of things as well. Some countries are very live and let live. They don't bother people in their country. They certainly don't bother people outside. And even if they wanted to or were to change, they don't have much capability. So those are some high level things that I would look for uncertain countries.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And, when we're thinking about relinquishment, renunciation of citizenship, obviously, part of the conversation is why would a person want to? Why would a person want to? And obviously, there's different reasons that a person might want to or feel compelled to relinquish their citizenship. But the way I look at the issue, right, is that inability to relinquish citizenship is most damaging when it's paired with another extraterritorially imposed obligation. Why extraterritorially imposed? Because if you're dealing with just obligations that are not extraterritorially imposed, so obligations, laws that you're subject to just by being physically present in the country, well, then ostensibly you can opt out just by leaving the country, okay, just by picking up, schlepping, taking a visit, moving abroad, whatever it is. But extraterritorial obligations, as we all know, they follow you as a citizen pretty much wherever you go, right? So the inability to renounce, right, I think, is most damaging when it's paired with one of those extraterritorial obligations. We have John Richardson here, resident expert on citizenship by, not citizenship by citizenship-based taxation, and that's the first type of extraterritorial obligation that would come to my mind, right? Inability to renounce combined with CBT, right? Another one would be mandatory military service. Another one would be, being subject to international sanctions as a citizen of a particular country, right? So it's really, I think, and I'd love to hear what other people think. I think the inability to renounce is the largest threat when it's paired with one of these other types of extraterritorial obligations from other countries. Let me throw out a question to John, right? And John, I'm going to put you in a position you don't like. We're lawyers. We don't like speculating too much, right? We like to have opinions that are based off of, at least in theory, laws and statutes. But this conversation is partially speculation and partially just thinking about how to think about these issues rather than citation to particular cases and statutes. So let me throw out the same question that I threw out to Alex to you, John. How should a person imagine someone's listening to this? Okay, they are an online entrepreneur. Okay, they have location freedom. They're 27 years old. They're going to live another 6-7 decades, and they know they want a second citizenship, a third citizenship, a fourth citizenship. Building a citizenship portfolio is part of their long-term plan for the next 10, 15, 20 years. For that person, in your opinion, John, how should they think about the issue of or the attack vector of inability to renounce or relinquish citizenship of a country that they're considering naturalizing in?
Well, I think the last 10 or 15 years have made this a very, very serious issue. I don't think that before, say, 15 years ago, the citizenship taxation stuff, too many people thought about this, number one. Number two, I think it's only probably been in the last 20 years or so that there's been a culture of global mobility in the world where people really thought about citizenship, right? But I would basically agree with you. For a long time, without really thinking about it, generally was of the view that multiple citizenships couldn't be a bad thing. I certainly don't see it that way anymore. I think there's pressure generally for countries to be looking for tax revenue. I think that we're shifting. If there is a global culture on citizenship, I think that we're shifting from a culture where citizenship, where people think of citizenship as benefits to the individual, without obligations and that sort of stuff, or without any kind of sanction. And I think that the issue of the Russian attack on Ukraine with Russian citizens being sanctioned, although it doesn't affect anybody I know, it's been clearly in the media. That's a problem. So we have American citizens, if that wasn't bad enough, who decided to become Russian citizens as well. they'd be subject to sanction. I mean, on things that are as mundane as being able to sign up for programs like I think the advanced diploma in international tax. If memory serves, I think they're even honoring sanctions on Russian citizens, et cetera. So I don't think anymore that, on the one hand, citizenships may give you a place to go, but on the other hand, you might not like when you get there. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I definitely agree, John. Multiple citizenship, even though of course it's my business, it's part of what I do, it cannot be looked at through the lens of just benefits, just picking up other benefits. I really think, and I encourage people to look at picking up multiple citizenships or the analysis of whether to do it as a ledger, right? With pros and cons, just that old school, you say, oh, I have this tough decision to make. You ask your parent, what should I do? And they say, draw a line down the middle of the paper, put pros and put cons. Now, obviously this is more complicated than that, but I think that's actually not a bad start, right? For thinking about these things, there's definitely cons, both real in the present as well as possibilities in the future to consider with second citizenships. I've said before in previous spaces, but I know not everybody's listened to every space. I think the four biggest what I call is red flags of second citizenship to consider, right? So the four biggest, extraterritorially imposed either obligations or drawbacks would be citizenship-based taxation, mandatory military service, inability to renounce, and then what I call basically just wide subjugation or subjugation to international sanctions. Okay, so citizenships, that are targeted, just as you said, John, in the example of Russia. Obviously, Iranians as well, and some other nationalities face difficulties in that way. But you have to think. You have to think about the possibility of not just you have to, I believe, delve into the land of a little bit of informed speculation. If you're 30 years old and you're hoping to live until you're, 80 or 90 years old, okay, you got another 50 or 60 years left of your life, okay? And as you said, John, people are working online way more now than even 10, 15 years ago. And I think that's only going to accelerate. You can live anywhere you want in the world, okay? You have relative location independence. A lot of these people they're not going to be just dual citizens or triple citizens. A lot of these people are going to be quadruple or even quintuple citizens. And a lot of them even have it as their express goal to do so. So if you consider, let's say, 4 citizenships and you have 60 years remaining on your life, okay, what's the chances that at least one of those 4 citizenships is going to either infringe on the ability to relinquish or renounce, or try at least to eliminate it entirely?
Well, may I add something here?
I don't know if you can hear John. He was trying to add something.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear anything at all. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I am gradually deciding that this whole emphasis on, citizenship by investment and that sort of stuff is going to eventually infringe on the quality of many citizenships, because it's going to get countries thinking about this sort of thing. We're already beginning to see limitations, or at least what I would consider to be limitations, on mobility for people who've acquired certain second citizenships, right? Just paying for them, et cetera. In fact, I think we see this as recently as last week. The U.S. government trying to impose visa fees, right, up to $15,000. And one of the things that I found interesting was that appeared to include, or presumptively include, people who'd purchased second citizenship. So I could see, and then we see this as a ongoing problem in Europe, right? Because of the right of mobility among countries. And I could see, citizenship by investment people being actively discriminated against more and more.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And so, I call that the robustness of the second citizenship, or of that particular citizenship. And then I refer to the robustness of a particular, what I call springboard benefit. Springboard benefit is a mobility benefit that you get in a third country by virtue of being a citizen in a second country. So the first example is visa-free access. You're absolutely right. So the visa bond pilot program the United States launched last week. it includes citizens of countries who obtain their citizenship by investment and are using that country's citizenship and passport in order to apply for the visa. Now, in practice, yet Department of State hasn't. It seems like they haven't quite implemented yet. That measure against citizens by investment. It seems like preliminarily the Department of State is just rolling out the visa bond program for citizens of two countries. I think it was Zambia and I forget the other one. But the writing is on the wall, right? That's a degradation of a springboard benefit of citizenship by investment, right? So the ability to apply for a visa to the United States using that country's citizenship and passport. It's a degradation of that benefit. It's a discrimination on the basis of the person having obtained the citizenship by investment. And John, as you know as well, as far as the E2 treaty investor visa, so a non-immigrant investor visa to the United States, not the EB5, in 2022, the E2 program implemented basically a measure whereby if you are applying for the E2 visa using a citizenship of a country that you obtained by investment, you have to be domiciled in that country for 3 years preceding your application, your E2 application. Well, most people who get citizenship by investment are not domiciled for 3 years. That's part of the attraction of citizenship by investment. It's getting the citizenship without having to be nailed there and physically present for long periods of time, right? So, it's E2 visa is not super popular. You're looking at single-digit thousands of applications per year from some of the countries that have citizens that apply the most. But it's definitely a benefit. It's one more benefit, one more springboard benefit of the citizenship by investment that's being degraded because of the fact of having gotten it by investment. So I absolutely agree with you, John. The one thing though that I would just add is because people effectively can nationality toggle, meaning they can kind of typically choose which citizenship they're going to use to apply for a third country benefit. For now, it's not the case that, hey, if you have three citizenships and one of them is a citizenship by investment, then you're subject to the visa bond no matter what country you apply, what passport you use to apply for the American visa. It's not the case yet. It's you're targeted if you obtain a country citizenship by investment and you are using that country's citizenship or passport. So you can toggle off for now. And I to be honest, I do expect that still to be the case. For enforcement reasons, I think it makes most sense to target, citizens by investment that are using that particular citizenship and passport. But yeah, it's, absolutely agree with you, John. People, we're seeing kind of citizenships obtained by investment being targeted, and people, I think, are not really enjoying the full benefits of those citizenships as if they had obtained it otherwise.
Well, would you agree with this very, very simple statement? Everybody's thinking about citizenship and what it means a lot more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I don't see, once these governments start thinking about this stuff, I don't generally see that going in a good direction. Or by that, I mean a direction that's particularly, sympathetic to individual rights and that sort of stuff. Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating thing. I am not entirely sure, but I mean, I'm not 20, but I'm not entirely sure that I'd be interested in having another citizenship, at this point. I mean, my instinct is that it's no longer free, that it is, I guess I could put it a latent complicating factor, right? Like, what do you want to do if a country even wants to impose an estate tax, right? Applying to its citizens abroad or something. So,
go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. My prediction is that, your point is, and this is certainly true at the moment, that, the restrictions on citizenship by investment apply if you're trying to make use of that passport. My instinct is that if you have any one of those things down the road, that may sort of heighten difficulties. But, we'll have to see.
Yeah, maybe that's possible. But going back to what you said, John, latent complicating factors. right? I absolutely agree, right? Because the more citizenships, anytime you're a citizen of a country, right, you're subject to that country's laws, even extraterritorially. And as we know, no one person, even if you are a citizen of a single country and you become a lawyer and you dedicate your whole life to knowing all the different types of laws you're subject to as a citizen of the country, you still couldn't get, I don't think you could even get to the end of it. I don't know what you think, John, but I think it's the depth
Well,
of the
I think you might be able to. I think you personally might be able to. Not me, but I'll let you work on it.
I mean, we can certainly try. I can try to go as far as and I do try to go as far as I can, but I don't think any person can, because that's just the depth of and complexity of the law. But here's the thing: if you have the escape hatch, if you have the escape valve, the ability to relinquish, then those latent complicating factors, there's some bite taken out of them, in my opinion. That's why this is so important. Maintaining the ability to not just enter but to exit. Okay, the ability to relinquish citizenship. If getting a citizenship means it's a one-way ticket, right? And then you combine it with all of these, as you say eloquently, John, latent complicating factors. Well, that's a real problem then. I mean, maybe in that case, I might be thinking more along the lines of what you said, which is not considering getting multiple citizenships. So, it's the ability to opt out. It's the ability to opt out. And I kind of, just in simplistic terms, I think of opt out from a country on two levels. I think of shallow opt out and deep opt out. I think of shallow opt out as physically leaving the country, picking up your toches, getting outside of the borders, okay, physically. And then I think of the deeper opt out as relinquishing citizenship somehow, basically, reducing the chances. Doesn't make it impossible that they can claim international jurisdiction over you, of course, especially the United States likes to do that, but reducing the chances, reducing the likelihood, the vulnerability to extraterritorial application of their laws on you.
A simple way to look at this, as you're describing, it reminds me of a little bit. If you buy we all buy plane tickets, right? You buy a plane ticket, the cheapest possible plane ticket, you're done, no changes, no refunds, right? And then you start moving up and you pay a little more and, you can get a refund or change or something like that. And that's kind of a good way to look at this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. If we're moving towards a culture of countries trying to fight to keep their citizens, even when the country wants to, or when the person wants to relinquish, well, that's going to make the decision to pick up another citizenship way, way more sobering, requiring way more of a sober analysis. Plus, the other thing, John, I mean, we're talking up until now kind of the idea of staying, within the boundaries of the law, not doing something criminal. But as we spoke about several spaces ago, John, what if you want to be a Congress member? What if you want to be a legislator in a particular country? What if you want to become a legislator in a country that doesn't welcome multiple citizenships, right? If your dream is to change the world as a politician through politics, and you have 2 or 3 citizenships and you can't get rid of one, and the country you want to run in says we don't accept dual citizens, that could obviously hamstring your decisions, you pursuing that goal. And I do think we're going to see more countries. I think we're going to see countries trending more towards either robust reporting obligations for multiple citizens running for office in their country, or outright prohibitions of dual citizens, or what I would call limited prohibitions. So prohibitions with certain waivers, etc. In any of those 3 cases, what countries you're citizen in and your ability to opt out if necessary are going to be material, right? If you want to pursue office. What do you think, John? Do you think, John, as countries kind of become more aware of multiple citizen issues, do you think we're going to see a trend towards more countries prohibiting, either in full or in part, dual citizens from office?
Yeah, I do. We talked about this before. I think that more than one citizenship raises serious, if citizenship means anything, raises serious compatibility issues with being involved in, the higher echelons of government, or even, the basic legislative branch. So, see, I think the genie's out of the bottle, right? 25 years ago, say going back to 2000, I don't remember anybody even talking about citizenship, really, right? I mean, I don't think the citizenship by investment industry, it really started. I mean, there was in Canada was particularly active in this, permanent residency through investment, and then you can get citizenship. But we certainly didn't have these, go buy this, buy that type of program. And once anything gets the attention of regulators, that generally is going to mean a dampening of freedom and opportunity on anything associated with it. There's a clear, if you look at, for example, I don't agree with this, obviously, right? But there is a contingent of people out there who believe that multiple citizenships provide, heightened opportunities for tax evasion and stuff like that, right? Look at Senator Wyden, for example, in Senate Finance Committee meetings. And this has been criticism coming from some parts of the EU in relation to the citizenship by investment stuff. But all I'm saying is this. The very fact that we're having this discussion today is evidence that more and more people are thinking about citizenship, and that might be normal to you. It's not normal to me. 25, 30 years ago, nobody was thinking about it. And when governments start thinking about things, that's the beginning of the imposition of regulations, restrictions, perhaps heightened obligations. And then we add to that, right, the sort of what I would call COVID-19 aggravated world of remote work. And generally work is sourced to the place where it's done from a tax point of view. That naturally brings in the whole tax aspect of this, right? So,
yeah, John, I think there's a generational shift in kind of the cultural zeitgeist, let's call it, of citizenship and multiple citizenship, right? You're older than me. I'm 40. There's people younger than me as well in this call, and I think the younger the people are, the more I think commonplace it seems to be for them to think about, being not just a dual citizen or a multiple citizen, right? I still remember. I mean, I still have, my parents' generation are baby boomers. I still speak to family members who are of that generation that are not entirely sure that dual citizenship is legal, even, which kind of surprises me, because I thought, it's like, I thought everybody understands that for years now. So it takes a long time, or it has taken a long time culturally, I think, basically, for people to adjust to what is the reality. It does seem, and it's hard for me to really judge this because I'm in this world, right? I'm a citizenship attorney, but it does seem like the shift in understanding is accelerating greatly. It seems like even just from 5 years, it seems like the difference in attitude and understanding, at least among the American culture, vis-a-vis multiple citizenship from 5 years ago to now, in my opinion, is greater than from 5 years ago, as opposed to even 20 years ago. I think that shift is accelerating. What do you think, John?
I think that's absolutely right. But I think that is, I remember in 1997 sitting in a restaurant and reading James Dale Davidson book, The Sovereign Individual, in 97 when it came out, or maybe it was 96. And, he had a lot of interesting observations. But the general point was that, we're moving from the industrial age into the digital age. And that's going to create all kinds of different opportunities, change the world, etc. And I really think that, all of this stuff follows changes in the world. And we're in a world where people don't have to be anywhere. I had dinner last night with a guy with 4 citizenships who just happened to be passing through Toronto, who I know, okay? And, people they're no longer tied to one country. They don't see themselves that way. They don't even see their livelihoods anymore really is tied to one country. And I think that that's mostly what's accelerated the whole citizenship discussion. I think it began with a multiple residency type of thing, which naturally evolved to citizenship. And I think it's been further accelerated or exacerbated, depending on your point of view. It's been accelerated by the publicity over offshore bank accounts and this, that, and the other thing. So this is where we are. The reason that, for the baby boomers generation, that they don't think about it, it's not that they don't think about citizenship. is that, their, to use your word, zeitgeist, okay, is firmly rooted in the last century, in the industrial age. I mean, sure, they use WhatsApp and, you know, all this sort of stuff and, book their vacations online. But the way they see the world is decidedly last century, or at least that's my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah, I agree. The sovereign individual, which I think was incredibly prescient. I mean, I sometimes just marvel at the fact that that book was published in, I think, like 96 or 97.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And of course, they didn't get everything right, but they had the guts to come on board with a lot of predictions, and a lot of them were dead on, dead right. I mean, they even predicted really, they didn't use the word Bitcoin, but effectively they predicted the rise of what is Bitcoin, right, during a time, the 90s, for God's sake. So yeah, I think that's, the book came out in the 90s. I don't remember when it came out. I read it years later, but I
Well,
do
it was, to
remember.
me, it was like 95, 96, 97, or something like
Right,
that.
right. I did see in some of my research about the book, I was just Googling, that it was roundly criticized and lambasted by, I can't remember which publication, but some, maybe, I want to say maybe the New York Times, maybe like some huge publications, lambasted it as just babble or crazy talk. But yeah, I think, John, I think a lot about these issues, the issue of, like, why is it so difficult to understand this concept of multiple citizenship and freedom of movement for some people? And one thing that I know I come across all the time, right? Less so in my own consults, because people come to me, to the consults. Typically, they've read either some of what I've written or some, writing about topics like this by colleagues like yourself or others. So they come a little bit educated. But when I speak to people, especially if they're over 50, let's say, and I use the term multiple citizenship, or apply for American wants to apply for citizenship elsewhere, a second country, pick up a second citizenship, a third citizenship, or a passport. One of the first thing, probably the first question that comes to mind, if it's not like one of these really, shiny countries, countries that's kind of well known in the American zeitgeist, like France or something, is, why would you ever want to live there? That's the concept that comes. I talked about citizenship. I didn't say residency. I say multiple citizens. They say, why would you ever want to? Oh, or do they want to move there? Do you want to move there? It's almost like the concept of residency and citizenship for I think older people is inextricably intertwined, and I think that intertwining is rooted in the last century. To your point, John, that
Yeah.
intertwining. Go
Could
ahead.
I just interject one thing here
Sure.
before I forget? This conflating residence and citizenship, which is what you're really saying, right,
Yep.
is, in my view, the single biggest problem in getting rid of citizenship taxation. That people don't understand what it is because they really see it as residency, right? I mean, the word may be different, but the vast majority of people, I think, of that age group and that generation are completely unable to disconnect the two concepts. And that's where you get, this, well, why would you ever want to live there? The answer, of course, is, well, maybe you don't, but you want to have a place to be able to live if necessary, whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's a conflation of residency and citizenship. You're absolutely right. And this conflation is exacerbated by people conceptually not thinking about the idea that you can be physically present in somewhere, have a citizenship somewhere else, and have work that's either remote work from connected to another physical location, or entirely in the interwebs, in cyberspace, right? And that's also obviously a topic that was spoken about a lot in the sovereign individual. So I think that inability, it's older people who either they're retired or they're close to retiring. They live their whole life working, showing up, going to work. Do you go to work? Are you going to work, right? Like, think about even that phrase, what's embedded, what's nested in that phrase, the fact that you go somewhere, you're physically present somewhere, right? And that's obviously, it's not entirely gone now. Obviously, some people still physically go to work, but it's way less common now, especially for so-called knowledge workers, white collar workers, etc.
Yeah,
So
well, that concept is deeply, deeply rooted in the U.S. tax code. Where they speak of a tax home, and this sort of stuff. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the point is simply this. The world of 2025 is nothing like what it was in 1995. It really isn't. But the reality is that most major laws in most countries have not changed to reflect that. Right? In the United States, we've got a tax code and immigration laws going back to the 50s, etc. And this is a big reason for all the tensions. You try to administer a tax code that's based on the industrial age, where people go to work for their lives, get a pension. And we have immigration laws that are, I mean, seriously out of touch with the reality, as you would know. But it's not just the United States. It's all of these countries, right?
yeah, and John, it's not just in the tax code that the concept of physically being where you work physically is integrated. It's also in the immigration code. We currently, if you travel to the United States on a B2 tourist visa, ESTA, or some other visa that does not include work authorization, and you're a remote worker, you're an influencer, you're a content creator, okay? It's not clear nor uniform in US immigration law whether you've worked without authorization in the United States or not. And what I mean by that is you're going to get different, and you get different answers based off of the context in which you're dealing with the issue. So if you do that, and then later on you try to adjust status in the United States, that USCIS officer could take a stance on whether that constituted unauthorized work. If you do that and then you go back abroad and then you're applying for another visa 3 years in the future, that issue could be treated a different way, okay, by the Department of State officer. It's because we don't have uniformity on that issue, right? And that's a reflection, like you said, of just codes that are based off of a reality that is no longer the case anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then John, one thing you talk a lot in your podcasts and your YouTube channel discussions with Anthony about freedom. Obviously underwriting all of these concepts is freedom, especially from a practical standpoint. For people who listen to this content, they want to know how to be free, how to be freer, right? At least. And the conclusion that I've come to as far as how to look at the issue is I don't look at freedom anymore through the lens of what I call immigration 1.0, okay, which is I'm here in this place, it's not that free. I want to immigrate to that place, which is more free. And obviously the United States has been the top destination, at least for the last century, right? If you're growing up in I don't know, let's call it, Soviet Union, okay? You feel like it's not that free, okay? Maybe you apply for asylum. People apply for asylum in the United States, come to the United States. I want to get freedom by physically moving, immigrating from this less free place to a more free place. I don't look at the issue like that anymore, okay? What I look at, the way I look at the issue is a lot more intangible, which is I look at freedom of movement as being the basis of the freedom, not the actual going from spot A to spot B. I now look at it as having the ability to move from spot A to spot B or to spot C or to spot D and then go back to B again or C. It's kind of like the atoms bouncing around, right? That's, I think, where freedom exists in what I call immigration 2.0, right? And obviously, if you're talking about the ability to move, requires a few elements, right? Going to one place obviously necessarily implies the ability to leave the place that you were at before. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, obviously, there's different gradations in the strength of ability to enter and to reside, right? And so, my line, at least the line I use that I associate with citizenship, is immediate highest right of entry and residency. Immediate. What that word means to me is you don't need to file an application in order to go. You don't need to file a form. You don't need to file any type of other application. It's immediate. Okay, the right is immediate. Highest right. What do I mean by highest? I mean the fact that due to international and also even domestic concepts of right of return, citizens, generally speaking, right, and there's exceptions out there, but generally speaking, citizens have the highest right of entry to come back into their country. And then right of entry and residency. So I look at the highest right of entry as being what I call the super tourist visa that's nested inside every citizenship. And then I look at the highest right of residency as what I call the super residence permit that's nested within any citizenship, right? So you take that, that's obviously just one, the concept of one example, one citizenship. But if you plug that in to the concept that I said, freedom of movement is where the freedom lies more rather than physically going from one place to another. And I think obviously it's flawed. It's a flawed way of looking at things. It's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. But I think that concept, I think that framework gets closer to how to look at how moving yourself closer to freedom. What do you think, John?
Well, I think that to put it another way, okay, freedom is a journey, not so much a destination, right? The ability to embark on the journey. But I would add to this that I think there's an element. I mean, fundamentally, I agree with you, yeah. But I think there's an element of being able to, live and survive in these places when you get there. And, there are all kinds of, tax-related things that make that very, very difficult. So, and this is, by the way, where you're coming from, possibly including your citizenship, matters so much, right? I take a very trivial example that I've heard so many times. People are, they're older, they have a pension. They move to Canada and, they say, oh my God, I didn't realize that Canada would tax the pension, that I earned in this other country. So, I would add to what you're saying, the ability to comfortably exist once you get there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously being able to support yourself financially, not incurring tax or costly reporting obligations that that cost you so much that they degrade your quality of life. Yeah, of course, absolutely agree. Those are two critical elements as well. All right.
I mean, there ought to be an international multilateral agreement on pensions, I think. And what I think it should be very, very simple that that wherever somebody lives in the world, they receive a pension that's based in another country, that the taxation of that pension should simply follow whatever the taxation was or is in the country where it was earned, right? If it was tax-free where it was earned, then it should be tax-free, if you come to Canada or the United States, right? I just think I think it's fair, I think it's just, and I think it recognizes the sort of dignity of the individual and the importance of people being able to go places, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, when you're dealing with lesser amounts of money, if the cost to remain in compliance is a significant percentage or even half of the financial benefit that you get from the benefit, well, effectively, you've lost that benefit then by moving to that.
Absolutely. These things are joined at the hip, okay? They're joined at the hip. To have the theoretical right to move to a country, but the inability to survive there because of its tax laws or because of the way it, taxes assets that you acquired before living in the country, I wouldn't call that freedom of movement at all.
Do you think it's better to have that ability to move there, even if it devastates you financially, than to not have the ability?
Of course I do. Of course I do. But that's a separate question. Obviously, the more freedom of movement, the better. There's no question about that, right? But I think in, analyzing the value of just simply, the ability to bounce around, I think that, I think it's reasonable to incorporate in what happens when you get there, right? Case in point, back to my dinner last night. So I'm talking to this guy and, he citizen of a number of countries, actually. And I said, well, so, what brings you to Canada, blah, blah, blah. And, we were just chatting. And then, he just sort of mentioned offhandedly, but I'm surely going to be out of here before I hit the 183-day thing, right? Et cetera. This stuff is a real problem. I think eventually these problems should be solvable. But at the moment, for the middle class, it's funny. I was at an immigration conference in London in June, And all these presentations go on about, and I am sympathetic to this, right? Impoverished people in the world, displaced persons, who are trying to find a place to, et cetera. And I think that's a hugely important thing. And I fully support, admire, respect, all the people who are working in that area. But the thing is this, right? There is such a thing as a middle class out there, people who have modest means, who just want to be able to live in another country. And I think they ought to be able to freely do that and not be effectively prevented from it because they happen to have a pension, or they happen to have a small business in another country, or something like that.
Absolutely agree with you. Multilateral
By the
treaty.
way, I did a presentation there. I could not convince a single person that this was an important issue. I mean, I didn't try very hard, but I could see their eyes glaze over.
Well, John, the more, generally speaking, the poorer a group of people are, applicants or clients or whatever, the less they're thinking about bouncing around. The more they're thinking about extricating themselves from one really bad situation, one location, and moving to another place where they have shelter or respite. It sounds like, is it the group that you were talking to? I mean, these kind of asylum lawyers, humanitarian-based immigration lawyers?
That would be the sentiment, refugee, asylum, displaced persons. Let's call them displaced persons, for whatever reason.
Right.
And again, don't get me wrong. I think that's a huge problem, and I admire so much, people who extend themselves for the benefit of that. But that's only one problem with migration. Migration is a problem for almost everybody, unless you've got so much money that it doesn't matter at all. It's a huge problem for the middle class. And this is the result of, we talk about the last century, where government, where the definition of retirement, financial planning, tax minimum, it's all the integration of the tax code into people's lives in a truly unacceptable way has caused these problems.
John, should every upgrade or edit of the immigration code have a pairing in the tax code too, and vice versa?
Should they be linked? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I think that I actually do. It's interesting because every few years, Congress, and I guess this comes from the state of Florida, puts together this proposal to allow Canadian citizens, usually they add a little more, who are over 60 or retired or some such thing, right? To allow Canadian citizens to move to the United States and stay for 8 months a year, if they buy a piece of real estate or something, right? The problem with this is that would make them tax residents of the United States. So typically what these proposed immigration laws do is they have a section that says, and they would not become a tax resident of the United States, under the rules. So, that type of thing is a recognition that these things clearly are linked. And I presume we're going to do a lot more of that. Why is the Trump gold card stalled? If it's stalled, I think it's stalled. I don't think it'll ever happen. But the reason it can't happen is because the Trump gold card is an immigration concept that's incompatible with the tax laws of the United States, right? What are they going to do? They have to write that law. They have to do the same thing they were doing with this Florida proposal to amend parts of the tax code to make this even possible, right? So, there's no question that this has gotten to the point where immigration raises huge tax issues, and tax is generally a damper on immigration, right? And at the same time, as there's almost a firewall between tax lawyers and immigration lawyers.
Yeah, but you've been taking your sledgehammer to that firewall, right?
Well, yeah, but I'm one person, right?
Yeah, so, in a hypothetical world, John, where this would probably never happen, obviously, because of government work. But let's say you could relinquish your citizenship in a day, streamline process, no, reliable relinquishment, okay, with very little chance of it being challenged by, whoever the authorities might be, Department of State in the US or, other corollary uh, government institutions elsewhere. Um, in such a situation, John, right? You, could you take more risks with naturalizing elsewhere? Could you naturalize a little bit more? I don't want to use the word recklessly, but let's say a little bit more care in a more of a carefree way without fear of observing of experiencing latent complicating issues as you said.
Well, I mean, look, I think that I don't know if I would become a citizen of any country if I knew I couldn't get out of it, period, regardless of what the country was. But the way I think people see this, you probably heard, when people talk about buying a boat or a plane, the two greatest days are the day you get it and the day you get rid of it, right? But the problem is that when people want citizenships or they want an immigration status, they're not thinking about how to get rid of it because they can't even imagine that they would want to, right? So, I mean, sure, in a perfect world, it'd be a lot easier to get rid of this stuff. Oddly enough, the IRS 2019 relief procedures for former citizens is, I think, an attempt to recognize that, right?
Yeah, John, I definitely agree with you. The level of knowledge and awareness of attack vectors presented by citizenships that you can't relinquish is relatively low. But I think we have more of an educated. I mean, not I think our audience, people who listen to you, people who listen to me, are more educated than the average person. They're at least aware of some of these issues, right? If a person has, going back to my hypothetical, 27-year-old, the 30-year-old, okay, remote worker, high earner, expecting to live 50, 60 more years, wants a citizenship portfolio, right? 3 or 4 citizenships. And I don't just randomly choose this profile. I do think this is like a big growing profile. For that person, if they're aware that, there's this thing called extraterritorially imposed obligations. Okay, I could owe a duty to my home country, even if I'm not present there, even if I haven't stepped foot there for 15, 20, 25 years. If they're aware of that, to the extent that it slows them down or makes them pause before picking up additional citizenships, if they knew they could get rid of the citizenships, reliably knew they could get rid of the citizenships in a relative short period of time. I use an extreme example, one day, but let's just call it a relatively short period of time. I think it's rational that they would be able to more freely, more carefree manner, pick up additional citizenships, whether it be by investment or, pursuing a citizenship by descent or, or by residency. I see a link, therefore, between the ability to aggressively pursue, and I don't think this is that big of an observation or that controversial, but if you know that you can get rid of the thing easily, well, you can go more aggressively, you can go harder in the paint on getting additional citizenships, right? Because you're not worried about what is it, entering Hotel California, I think that David Lesperance, our colleague, says, you can check in but you can never leave, right? so
Yeah.
so the ability to relinquish issue, I see it when it comes to talking about extraterritorially imposed obligations of citizenships. I think I see the ability to relinquish as either the top factor or maybe the second factor, but it's way up there. What do you think, John?
Oh, I think it's got to be way up there. Absolutely, it's got to be way up there. To give it, maybe this isn't even that extreme. To become an American citizen, if you can't relinquish it, is to make the decision that you're going to be subject to the U.S. tax code the rest of your damn life.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. That's
I
exactly
mean,
right.
I think the problem here is that to some extent these things are issues only if people understand it a little bit. And nobody understands it. I mean, they're trained to sort of think of citizenships as opportunities and, maybe a good thing. I doubt, over time, people may come to see it this way. I don't know. Particularly if we get a court decision sometime in the United States that says there's no constitutional right to renounce. But yeah, I mean, sure. The ability to renounce is important, and the ability to renounce without having all your assets confiscated is important, right? And what good does the current statutory right to renounce U.S. citizenship mean if it's going to devastate you financially because of the exit tax? Which it does for a lot of people.
Yeah. So, we have obviously the United States versus Roger Keith Ver currently pending. I didn't check the docket this morning, but I checked just a few days ago, 5 days ago on Pacer. No new developments besides another hearing continuance. I suspect it's because the parties are talking settlement. I think you wrote, John, that you suspect the same thing. But it seems like that would be, that is the case that has the defendant that's facing enough time and well funded enough to fight this thing and create some case law. Now we don't have an opinion, at least not in this case. We don't have an opinion that says the right to renounce is not a constitutional right. But obviously we saw in the government's opposition to Ver's motion to dismiss that they made the argument that the right to expatriate was not a fundamental constitutional right. What do you think is going to happen, John? Look into your crystal ball for us. What do you think is going to happen with the Ver case? Do you think it's headed towards settlement?
Well, obviously this is nothing but my opinion and impression based on knowing nothing about it other than what's in the public domain, right? But it does seem to me that for the government to win on this thing, given that these are criminal charges, I think they've got to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he understated the quantity of the crypto that he had. Okay, and when he filled out his 8854's exit tax return. That's the only part of the allegations that I think could possibly rise to a criminal standard. Now, I don't know the facts, obviously, but if I were a government lawyer and if I slowly reached the conclusion that the only way that I could get a criminal conviction was on that one point, boy, I'd have to be awfully sure of my evidence, to want to continue with that, because, the government can lose this thing. Who knows? Maybe Ver, does enter into a plea agreement, not because he's guilty necessarily, right? I don't have any opinion on his guilt, right? Obviously, but there's a lot of issues that the government has raised here, and a lot of these things I think are difficult in a criminal context, right? So there's that. I don't know how many issues would be argued in the thing. Would they, of course, if there were a plea or some sort of a settlement, then the right to renounce wouldn't be argued at all. But the right to renounce, this is not the first time this has come up, right? There was this Accidental Americans case, I think in January of 2003, where they were raising the argument that there's a fundamental right to renounce, or the right to renounce was a principle of ordered liberty, or such and such a thing. And I believe the decision came down rejecting that, right? Or at the very least, the government, rejected that. So this is, I think, very much a live issue. I don't know what happens in the Ver case. What do you think?
Obviously, I don't know anything more either besides what's in the public domain. And I haven't even consumed everything in the public domain about the case. So obviously take this with an enormous grain of salt. But just given the fact that the Trump admin is kind of wheeling and dealing, and they seem to be willing to cut deals, for lack of a better term, and the fact that we've had five continuances unopposed, all five of them stipulated between government lawyers and Ver. To me, that doesn't happen. That's not courtesy to let Ver's new counsel get up to speed. Maybe one or two stipulations would be that. To me, this says that they're it's highly suggestive. And again, what do I know? But to me, it's suggestive that they're nailing down the specifics of a lengthy, complicated settlement agreement, both criminal and civil. So if I had to, again, what do I know? But if I had to guess, if somebody forced me to guess, I would guess the case is going to end in a settlement. and VAER's going to pay some money, some significant amount of money. I would like to see the case be, proceed though, to see argument, and see the issue of right, right to expatriate as a fundamental constitutional right. I would love to see it be argued by, a defendant that's has the financial resources to hire the very best lawyers in the world. I would love to see that. I don't think it's going to happen though.
Has
Well,
anyone tried to expatriate while in prison before? Is that something
yes,
that?
yes,
Oh yeah, there's a
yes.
whole line of cases on that. Yeah, there's a whole line of cases of prisoners pro se arguing the right to expatriate as from within the United States. There's a subsection of oh god, I forget the code, but there's a subsection specifically for relinquishment of citizenship within the United States. I'm not aware, I don't know all the cases, but I remember about a year ago, I read through a whole string of cases of prisoners trying to effectively, expatriate so they got out of prison. And I don't remember any winning arguments, but I don't know. John, did you read some of those cases?
Yeah, but I really don't remember them, to be honest. Yeah, I'm aware of them. I don't think that the prisoners have been successful generally, if I'm right on that.
Yeah,
The reason,
I don't recall reading a single case where a prisoner was successful.
yeah, I mean, here's a fairly well-known guy who tried that. It was Bobby Fischer, right? Former world chess champion Bobby Fischer.
I'm not familiar with the case.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, this is just, really horrible stuff, right? So, so Bobby Fischer played Boris Spassky in 1974, the current Russian chess champion, for the world championship in Reykjavik, Iceland, and won. And then he went into obscurity, basically. He never defended his title. And then in the early 90s, he sort of resurfaced and agreed to play a rematch with Spassky. I think it was in Serbia. And the U.S. government, of course, was upset by this. If I have this right, I think their argument was that by playing this chess match in Serbia, that he was somehow in violation of U.S. sanctions, right? Now, notice, okay, now I don't know if he'd have to be a citizen or not, to be affected by that, but he was at that time a citizen. A few years later, he was arrested at, I think it was Tokyo's Narita Airport, locked up. This is obviously the request of the U.S. government. And while he was in prison, he asked for a State Department official to come so he could renounce his citizenship. And, it's funny. I remember the story. I don't remember the outcome. I think the outcome was that, I really don't know. Because, what the law says is it needs to be done before a consular officer. It doesn't say it has to be done inside a consulate, right? So I don't know what happened there, but there's an example of somebody incarcerated outside the United States who wanted to renounce his citizenship. You can probably look it up and see what happened. But eventually then, here's a citizenship related factoid. Iceland gave him citizenship, right, because of his importance to the country. And he then lived out his life in Iceland. He died in Iceland. And somebody actually sent me a picture of his grave once, just outside Reykjavik. But he died as a renounced U.S. citizen and a citizen of Iceland. It's funny. I bet there's a lot of people who don't even know who Bobby Fischer was at this point. It was so long ago. Anybody on this call not know?
Go ahead.
Anybody on this call not know who Bobby Fischer even was? How fleeting is fame?
I know who he was. I didn't know this particular aspect of the case. Although I'm sure I'll go down a rabbit hole and research that now. But,
well, you really should. You really should. But here's where I would suggest, and I'd love to know the answer on this. Was go through the facts and make sure I'm not hallucinating anything. I don't think I am. But so he gets a U.S. consular officer who I think came down to the jail, right? Which would be, I think, normal, right, for a U.S. citizen incarcerated somewhere, maybe. But then the question was whether he was actually able to renounce his citizenship or not. And the way I see the issue is, the law requires, the statute requires the renunciation needs to be before a consulate officer, but it never says that it needs to be in a U.S. consulate or embassy. So who knows? Maybe he was successful. The reason why I think this is important is because back to the relinquishment of U.S. citizenship, this has become such a big problem that I think that provisions ought to be able to be made for people to do this by Zoom or something, connected to a U.S. consular officer, but not necessarily having to, go into a consulate or embassy. I mean, I was talking to somebody last week who had to fly 5 hours to pick up a CLN, if you can imagine.
Why would the consulate help with that? That's kind of the core issue, right?
Why would they not help?
So why would they want to make it easier to renounce? Presumably, people that are renouncing are doing so for their own benefit rather than the benefit of the U.S. government.
Well, I don't know that. Well, I can give you some reasons. How about they get 2350 off them? They don't have to worry about them anymore. Most of them are not high net worth people. So, I mean, the way I think the U.S. sees itself as having two categories of citizens, those who matter and those who don't. And, without money, you're not going to matter. So, I mean, I don't think that they, aggressively say we want to get rid of our citizens. That I don't believe for a minute. But I don't think they care about their citizens at all either. I mean, I'm quite serious in my proposal that I think that, see, the problem, the way I see this, is that the United States never really moved on to see citizenship as a bundle of rights. They're still locked into, late 1920s, where citizenship, it's sort of a pre-World War II thing, where citizenship was a bunch of obligations. So I think the primary attitude that the United States has towards its citizens is sort of an ownership model. We can tax them. We can use them as instruments of public policy. They can't play chess in Serbia. We have the Corrupt Foreign Practices Act. I mean, think of the Corrupt Foreign Practices Act. You can't bribe a foreign government official when that's what lobbyists do every day in D.C. I mean, the double standard is unbelievable, right? So if the model is that they own their citizens, then wouldn't it make sense for a country with a lot of dual citizens to make an offer at a discount to effectively just say, look, you know what? These people want to renounce. They can't afford it. We'd like to actually buy back the rights to these citizens. Will you sell us your citizens with their consent, of course? I mean, what do you think of that model?
I think it makes a lot of sense for the U.S. to make, I mean, it already kind of does, right? It makes it hard for its wealthy to leave and easier for the non-wealthy to leave. It would make sense to me if they made renunciation free so that people who are more likely to not be able to afford it can get out. People that maybe they might need consular assistance abroad or some other benefit from the US government, easy to get rid of them and hard for the wealthy to get out. So I think they kind of do it a little bit. It's just they're not organized and smart enough to get to the point where they're actually buying and selling the citizenship.
Well, I mean, sooner or later, this problem has got to be solved because the United States has made it not impossible in a logical sense, but in a practical sense, it's really made it impossible for middle class people to leave the United States and set up a new life somewhere else, right? And I really think that has got to come to an end. And then, of course, they have all these bizarre things like, we talk about exit taxes. Well, if you're a dual citizen from birth, you're exempt from it. This sort of stuff, right? It's just so full of, all of these arbitrary rules and this incredible injustice.
That's what government, it's the ideal position of government is everyone is a criminal and thus they can't criticize the government or make too much noise because otherwise they can start looking into investigating your criminal aspect. So the more laws they have, the more impossible it is for you to comply, the better from the government perspective.
Well, I think that you're talking about the United States or all governments.
Any government. If you break
Yeah.
their law, they have the right to lock you up for the rest of your life in pretty much every country. In some countries, they can even kill you. You have too much of a plant that they don't like, death penalty in some countries. So the more laws and restrictions they have, the more power they have over you. That these laws target the traitors who left the country, quote unquote, is great because one, it's hard for them to vote, and they're also not as sympathetic of a demographic. If there were 10 million Americans in the country that were being affected by these draconian reporting requirements, there would be outroar and also political consequences. But because these are those Americans that left the country, then there's not much sympathy to them. But the US is able to have a lot of power over these people, which is what they want, even though they rarely enforce FBAR penalties and stuff.
Well, they don't. I mean, what they've done, yeah. I mean, that's certainly true. It's it is very much a question of of lack of political representation, but it's more than that. It's a whole subset of laws that are really unknown, as you point out, to the vast majority of people. But I mean, look, I think the bottom line, coming back to the theme of this, is that we talk about the importance of renunciation. I think we agree on that. Or relinquishment, whatever word you want to use. I mean, would everybody on this call agree that it's too hard to renounce U.S. citizenship?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. And they can't renounce freely either, because, except in a logical sense, because, I mean, just before I'm just walking around, I'm talking to everybody here today, but I was on a call with somebody, who had an offer to renounce next week, right? And he said, should I renounce? I said, God, no. I mean, we're not clear on where your finances are, I mean, is he subject to an exit tax? Is he not subject to an exit tax, right? I mean, that doesn't sound to me, it sounds to me like it's conflating the logical freedom to renounce with the practical freedom to renounce. I mean, you're not free to renounce if you're going to have so many of your assets confiscated that you can't live anymore, right?
And you also lose rights, like the right to keep and bear arms if you renounce as well. So there's extra things you lose beyond just your citizenship rights. You have punishments in addition.
Well, I would look, if you renounce any citizenship, you're losing stuff. Okay, for sure. I mean, at a minimum, you're losing the right to live in the country, to enter the country, right? And that's not a small thing. And there are other things. I mean, sure, as I understand, okay, in the case of the United States, you're losing some kind of right. Is it the right to buy firearms or something like that? But yeah, sure. I mean, that's true. But what's I think a bigger reality is that you can't enter the United States anymore without permission, right?
Yeah, but that's normal as a non-citizen. But the
So
U.S.
you're just saying these are extra U.S. imposed issues.
Yeah, I think, John, what he's saying is, so in the firearms prohibition, so 18 USC 922G, one of the categories that of people who are prevented from possessing, owning, selling, transporting through states firearms are U.S. citizenship renounced. It's, as you know, I know you know this, John, but I think what he's trying to say basically is you don't just go back to a default of not having the right, for example, the right to enter the United States when you relinquish, but now there's a step further, which is you cannot. I mean, even
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah,
anybody else
yeah,
who comes to
yeah.
the United States, anybody who's in the United States with lawful status generally can handle the firearm, except renunciants, right? So that
Yeah.
does seem a little bit
and,
vindictive, right?
and
I don't know what the history is behind the law, but that seems like just trying to punish.
and this
Well,
is
it's just laws have been around forever, I mean, of course it's ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous.
and don't forget the covered expatriates. They don't have the same ability to make gifts to U.S. persons as your normal non-resident alien does. So they're
That's
also
right.
treated worse than if they were just born a foreigner, which to me seems backwards. I think what India does makes some sense, where you have you have like a green card type thing for people of Indian descent, even if you're not a citizenship. So you have some
Yeah.
right by your ethnicity and parental or grandparental ties to the country. And so the US could have a model like that, but it's the opposite. Not only do they treat you as a non resident alien in most cases, they even have a few cases where they treat you worse than a normal non resident alien, despite you presumably having paid a bunch of taxes and other benefits to the US government over the course of your life. They punish you.
Well, yeah, and then I suppose we should probably add in the Reed Amendment, right? That extra burden, right, on entering the United States. If you renounced for to avoid U.S. taxation or whatever that says. So yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, there is no doubt that the United States is a very, very punitive culture, right?
Just one point, Alex. I don't think so. What Alex is referring to is the OCI, Overseas Citizen of India, which is not it's not full Indian citizenship. It falls in this category that I just colloquially call semi-citizenships. I don't think we're ever going to have something like that in the United States because the very raison d'être of the OCI is the fact that India does not permit dual citizenship. That's why they have kind of this step down, type of status. The United States doesn't have that issue, so I don't think we're ever going to have something like that in the United States
We
where
kind of do.
people relinquish. What do we have in the U.S.?
We have non-citizen nationals.
I wouldn't. I don't know. No, I would. I know. Nomenclature notwithstanding, I still would consider that to be part of citizenship. Well, you know what? No, the voting, you get the passport. You know what? I'm not sure. I'm going to withhold. I'm going to think about that actually before I respond. I'm going to think about whether that's a
Well,
corollary to the
it's a
OCI.
great position to be in because you can carry a U.S. passport and you can enter the United States, without the tax and reporting disabilities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
the
mean
thing is,
that's great stuff.
OCIs don't get an Indian passport though,
But
with the
they do have a
visa-free access.
passport type. I think they have some kind of passport document, right? That's what.
They do, but it's not. They don't get the benefits of visa-free access that Indian citizens get. So
No,
it's a
they
travel
get the
document.
right to they get the right to come back to India. I think
Exactly.
it's just what they get, right? But the thing is this, right? That would be a huge improvement. I think a lot of Americans would be very, very happy to be able to have some assurance that they could re-enter the United States. Whatever.
Oh, if they could if they could re-enter the United States, I think that would make renunciations and relinquishments spike. We've spoken about this before. I think the main thing that holds people back that want to or are interested in relinquishing is fear of not having the ability to visit elderly parents. I actually have a hard out right now. I can let you guys continue if you like. Otherwise, I'll have to end the space and we'll maybe pick this up in a part two.
I'm going to continue my walk, so I'm happy to end at this point as well.
Okay. Okay. It's been
Don't
a
know
good
that I have anything
conversation.
to add.
Can I just
Okay.
ask a question, please?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Matt.
Yeah, so if you're a non-citizen national, are you still subjected to the factor reporting requirements?
No.
Is there a precedent for this?
Well, I don't know what you mean. Well, it's just a question of the law, because you see, if you look at the Internal Revenue Code, it says that, all individuals are subject to the U.S. tax code, and the regulation defines individuals as a citizen or a resident. It doesn't include a national. So, that's it, basically. I mean, nationals are very privileged people, as are dual citizens from birth.
The
I
problem
mean, there's a
is
hierarchy of U.S. citizenship, right? Not all citizens are the same. The lowest form of U.S. citizenship in the 21st century would be, somebody who could trace their lineage from the daughters of the American Revolution, never had another citizenship. That's the worst of the worst, right? They get the worst treatment. the best treatment, if you are a citizen, be dual citizens from birth. And then we have the issue of nationals, et cetera.
Because as I understand it, if you go and claim your birth certificate and an authorized version of your birth certificate and put it in a trust, then you can become a non-citizen national. That's how I understand it.
No, that's
And
a
then
lot
you
of.
can just...
Go ahead.
I don't. I'll let Parviz, flush that one out. I don't think that's correct, but
No,
You can look up
that's. Go ahead.
the foreign manual talks a lot about non-citizen nationals. You can look up who got that status there, and I found that to be a very helpful resource on it. But basically, there's two categories of people: those in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. When it became part of the United States, they had the option to elect for it. I lived in the Commonwealth, and I don't know anyone who knows anyone that elected for it. And then people born in American Samoa that don't have U.S. parents can also have it, or people of American Samoan descent that meet the presence requirements if their kids are born abroad. So it's extremely hard status to get, and if you're born already, you can't get it. And if you're American citizen parent, then it's going to override the non-citizen national part. So it's extremely
well,
difficult.
on the issue of the American citizen parent, doesn't it depend on how many years of presence they have in the United States? What you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is you're sort of laying out the requirements of how one is a national, right, as opposed to a citizen.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that sounds reasonable. Absolutely. There aren't a lot of them, but for those who have it, it's
great. You made a
great.
good point. That's correct. If the citizen parent is unable to pass their citizenship, then their kid could be a national if the other parent was a national, or if they were born in American Samoa. So yeah, that's a good.
Yeah, something like that. Something like that. I mean, most of this is laid out in that long section of the Immigration Nationality Act, I think. But it's very interesting. I once had a conversation with I don't know, it wasn't on the national thing. It had something to do. I mean, if you're born in Puerto Rico or you're a U.S. citizen, but you're not taxed on your U.S. source income, right? So what happened was that this guy moved from Puerto Rico to Europe and couldn't believe it that all of a sudden he was taxed on his worldwide income because he moved out of Puerto Rico, right? Anyway, a lot of arbitrariness, a lot of stupidity, and a lot of designations which are based on circumstances of birth and not based on circumstances of life. And that's the problem with this, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a hard out, actually. I got to go, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, John. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Matt, David, everybody else who showed up. As a reminder, we're going to have our next mobility space on Monday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we're going to talk about the brand new Citizenship by Investment program announced by Sao Tome and Principe. And specifically, I'm going to focus in that discussion on the things that are not spoken about so much about, new citizenships by investment, conditions for loss of the citizenship, things that are kind of the nastier underbelly, which you don't really hear so much in marketing discussions. So if that's a topic that's interesting to you, make sure to sign up for the notification, and we'll talk on Monday. And we could, I may do a part 2 to this discussion, inability to renounce citizenship, because it sounds like we got more to flesh out here. I just have a hard out right now, so I got to go. So
all right,
thank you, everybody.
Discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.